burn those dollars, right, Tony? What do you think?
That's
De-dollarization
that's
or
what we
milkshake?
think. Well, it's a mix of both, actually. It's time frames, right? So,
Yeah,
our view is over the next 2 months, we do see the dollar pull back a little bit. And as we go into, say, February, we start to see some revaluation or appreciation in the dollar. So, the Trump story has kind of gotten a little bit ahead of itself. The strong dollar has kind of gotten a little bit ahead of itself. So this pullback that we're seeing this morning isn't really a surprise to us. It's what we forecast. And at the time that we put out our forecast, we looked crazy because the dollar was just appreciating like crazy.
yeah. Well, we had that huge spike. Euro touched 103.
Right.
You have any levels that you think Euro could accomplish during this time frame into Feb?
Well, given what's happening in Europe with the French government, the German
Yeah,
government, the UK government, I think there are a number of exogenous variables, and you really have to take it a day at a time. Of course, we have levels, but we don't, we definitely see the euro depreciating. Our models are showing we do a once a week reforecast to complete intelligence. So our models are showing a slight depreciation with the euro. But given what's happening with those three governments, that may accelerate, especially the ECB has already said they're going to reduce interest rates a bit, 25 basis points, I think. But
yeah.
who knows what they'll have to do to support the political risk there. So, I think, and maybe it's not just interest rates, maybe it's other, monetary intervention to keep things going. But, we do a weekly podcast, which you've been on, Dale, of course, called The Week Ahead. And we've talked about things like German deindustrialization for probably 3 years. And so it's a real risk in Europe. And I think as we see these governments fall, the real question is who is going to come? Are we going to have pragmatists come? Whether they're on left or the right, I don't care. Are we going to have pragmatists come or are we going to have idealists come? And I think what happens with interest rates, as we get real interest rates, you have to have pragmatists come back to the table. So as we've seen things like green energy become unaffordable as real interest rates have come back. We're seeing government programs become unaffordable as real interest rates come back. And you look at Korea, why did it fall? Well, ultimately, it was the budget. Why did
Right.
France fall? Ultimately, it was the budget, and so on and so
Yeah.
forth. So,
Right.
governments have to start looking at these real trade-offs, and they can't expand their headcount and their programs forever, especially when money costs money, right? That's the real problem is with interest rates, money costs real money. And so you can't continue to tax your citizens, at higher and higher rates. And so you have to have pragmatists come to the table and govern.
Where do you find pragmatists during the fourth turning?
Uh, I think you find it, well, you certainly, no offense, Dale, but you certainly don't really find it a lot again in baby boomers. I think baby boomers have been in an environment, and I don't necessarily know that it's their fault, but through their lifetimes, they've had a very expansionist government experience, right?
Yeah.
So it's really hard to find pragmatists among baby boomers who really are interested in bringing change to the table. So now I look at, and again, I don't know where everybody falls with politics, and I'm not advocating, someone either way, but when you look at, the average age of the people that Trump is bringing to the table, they're in their 40s, right? They're not these
Right.
124-year-old guys who are sitting in Congress, right? They're guys in their 40s who have an interest in the future and have kids and, want to look at policy that has an impact, 10 and 20 years on, not people who are going to not be on this planet in 2 or 3 years, who are just trying to, make
Is,
short-term political ends meet.
is that a forecast?
We've got a forecast for. No, I don't
Anyway,
think so. I don't think so. I don't really go there, but
I plan to go a little further than two or three, but you never know. It could end after the interview. I might be
No,
so
no. Hey, for me
I'm so
too.
despondent right now, being
For
a part of the baby boom
for me too,
generation.
Dale. It could,
You know,
it could end
I
today.
didn't, but I didn't ride the crest of the wave like I do know what you're talking about.
Yep.
And even within the sect of baby boomers, there were those that had to kick in every door to make it open,
Of course. Yeah, no, no.
right?
Of course.
You
And
know,
I'm largely talking about the baby boomers in DC, right?
mm.
And the baby boomers in European governments. And,
Oh,
this is
DC.
this is the
Yeah,
real problem is um, until we have some sort of generational change in governance, and
yeah,
you can say the same thing for Japan, you could say the same thing for Korea, you could
the
say the
whole
same
world.
thing for China, right? And
Yeah,
so, until we have leadership after Xi Jinping, we're not going to have dramatic change in China. Until we have leadership after the current whoever's in power this week in Japan, we're not going to have real change. And you have younger people who are begging and really expectant for something different. But these are people who at the apex of their career had ZERP and NERP environments, and they
yeah,
just
true.
can't adjust their mind to a real interest rate environment. Meantime, the generations behind them are feeling the real trade-offs of in inflation, right? And this
Yeah,
is why we're seeing the political change where
yep,
governments fall, where, different people get elected and other things. And so this is where I look at, you look at Korea this week with the martial law, and then 6 hours later it was gone because people don't
yeah,
want business as usual, right? They don't want, just kind of top down type of things. So, you know, I'm I believe that, and what we believe, and what our platform is showing is that we do have a short-term kind of Trump expectation bounce in things, and we did have the dollar bounce for about a month and a half, and we're now starting to see that kind of fall down a little bit. And that's okay. As we get into February, March, we'll start to get a feel for what policy is possible. We'll
how
start to get
about this? How
yeah,
about this, Tony? Is it possible that what we're seeing is a great investor relations campaign
absolutely.
for an IPO or for a company that's already diluted and about to go bankrupt,
It's not a bad analogy. And the problem, Dale, is that that's happening now in the US, France,
right?
Germany, South
Globally.
Korea, and so on and so on. And it's happening
Yeah,
all over the place.
yeah,
And the real question is who will get on board with the change that needs to happen? It looks like the US has. And again, this isn't a political alignment thing. It's,
yeah,
who is really putting in the actual operational leaders who have a stake in the future. And so
yeah,
will we see that in France? Will we see that in Germany? Will we see that in the UK? Will we see that in South Korea, Japan, China, other places? Because I believe we're in this, say, 2 to 3 year zone where we have to see that type of change. Otherwise, economies surrender, right? And when we look at what's happening in the US, and the Biden administration has done this, somewhat controversially in terms of getting more manufacturing in the US because that spins a lot of tax revenue, it spins jobs, it spins other things, right?
yeah,
And so Trump obviously wants to continue that. Where you see Germany deindustrializing, you see China on some level surrendering to its old model and not necessarily contending with the future of regionalization of trade. And so China has real problems right now because its leadership can't
yeah.
adjust to more services and spending based economy. They want to fall back to export driven mercantilism, and they can't get their brain around where things need to
Yeah.
go.
And G is a Chinese yuppie.
Of course he is. Yeah. And the guy experienced the Cultural Revolution. He experienced the 80s and 90s. He experienced, the 2000s. And
Yeah,
so he's lived modern China history, right? But it's really hard for him to see, the next, around the corner in the world, right? And so, um, moving on to China, I do believe that, and this is not the consensus view, but I believe that China will cooperate with the incoming Trump administration. Okay. They will vocalize opposition because that's what politicians do. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, they will cooperate with Trump on certain things. And when I here's some specifics around that. Until
Does Trump give away, say it's, we're not going to interfere if you go into Taiwan and
Oh
they'll
no, of
work
course
with
not.
us? Huh?
No, no, because the DPP in Taiwan, so just for context of people listening, I lived in Asia for 15 years. I did work with most governments in Asia. I understand, I did work with a lot of Asian companies. I used to lead research for a company called The Economist. I've sat with the president of Taiwan. I've sat with leadership in China. So the DPP, which is the ruling party in Taiwan, has a very tight relationship with the Republican Party in the US.
Yeah.
So I don't believe that Trump will allow China to take over Taiwan, at least in his term. I do believe that the relationships between Taiwan and the U.S. will continue. What does China have to tangibly gain by fighting for Taiwan? Absolutely nothing. They get to win what Mao Zedong and Deng weren't allowed to do, which is take over Taiwan. But Xi Jinping, his support in China is somewhat fractured. Of course, throughout the bureaucracy, he's peppered all of his supporters. They don't have, and I say supporters kind of in quotes, they they have their minds, they don't have their hearts. I worked in the Chinese bureaucracy unpaid, but I was very deeply involved in the Chinese bureaucracy for about 2 years, and I can tell you that he has their minds because they have to be aware of every word they say, but he
Yeah.
does not have their hearts because they're terrified of him and they're terrified of his minions. And so Xi's grip on power is much less certain than everyone in the West believes. And whenever
Okay.
I talk to a
Interesting.
Chinese insider, they say, and this was probably 2 years ago when people started saying this, is just give it a few more years. So there's an expectation, and I've been telling people that we should expect some sort of dramatic change in China in probably 2027. So the move to regionalize supply chains out of China has been a good one. And a lot of this has happened under the Biden administration, right? And it's going to continue under Trump and making sure that the US and other countries have those core manufactured goods either nearshored or onshored is something that's really, really, really critical because, we could have dramatic political events in China in 2 to 3 years.
Okay. Is that enough time to reshore what took 20, 30 years to export industrialization to China to give up ours? Can we reshore all of that in a couple of years? And yeah, I mean, there was already a story today about, I forgot what mineral it is, but China has it and they're not going to ship it to us. So don't you? That kind of flies in the face that already we're going to have good relations, even though they have the threat of more tariffs. Um, they're
Yeah.
already talking about we're going to have spot shortages, aren't we? If tariffs go into effect, and supply chain issues again, if there's a trade war as tariffs
Um,
increase. I mean, I don't hear anyone talking about the too much about the negative side of tariffs. I know, well, it's just a threat, but if they're not threats and they end up happening, uh, tell me the good side of it.
The good side of tariffs. Okay, so there was a report put out by the U.S. Commerce Department in May of 2023. So this is under the Biden administration, and they looked at steel imports under the tariffs that were imposed in 2017 on China and on other countries. And they chose steel because there's really no technology involved in steel. Of course, there's technology, but it's standard across operations,
Yeah,
right? China
yeah,
produces, I think, 70+% of the world's steel. So what it showed is the tariffs are levied. There's an impact on price for I think 4 months, 4 to 5 months. And so prices rise, import prices rise for 4 to 5 months. And then after that time, the price reverts to the global price for steel. So they're looking at other, say, customs data from other parts of the world to look at the kind of global steel price, right? So what happens in that time is China subsidizes those manufacturers to offset the impact of tariffs. So, China is a centrally planned economy. If their export mechanism dies to their largest customer, they have major economic impacts. So they can cut off certain rare earth minerals,
Okay.
which I don't believe they will. Okay.
Okay.
I think that's a vocal threat, and they may cut off some, and there may be some high visibility things that happen or whatever. But for the most part, the stuff that's going into is going into goods that are manufactured in China anyway and exported, right? Or Japan, or Taiwan or South Korea, or something like that, right? Um, so those goods end up being subsidized by the Chinese government, whether it's at the central government level, at the province level, or at the city level, or a combination of all of those. And so I actually spoke to the National Development and Reform Commission, the Chinese economic planner, in January of 2017, as Trump's first administration was coming in. And I said, look, these are the policies that Trump is putting in. They were incredulous. They absolutely did not believe that Trump would levy a trade war against China. I told them, I warned them, said what's going to happen. They didn't believe it. So this time around, I think there is still some incredulity. They really don't believe it on some level. They don't believe he'll do all that he says he's going to do. But I
Mhm.
think you do have people who believe it will happen and are preparing for it to happen. I think in many cases, they didn't really believe Trump would win. I was on the phone with the number two in the Chinese embassy in DC on the evening of the election in 2016. And they were shocked. They ran no scenarios for a Trump win in 2016. There are like 500 think tanks in Beijing, and none of them ran a scenario for Trump winning. This time around, I think there was a desire for Kamala to win, but people probably had to do some analysis of a Trump win. So now they're running a lot of simulations around how do they support their own industry if tariffs are levied. So, the US has plenty of things they can pull too. If you look at soybeans, if you look at sorghum, if you look at a lot of grains that we export to China, that really can't go anywhere. They don't
Well,
have
they did.
permanent
They
sources.
already did. Well, during the tariff war, they went to Brazil. They didn't buy our stuff. They're back in buying our grains now.
Yes, but the Brazilian soy is human edible soy. The US soy is animal edible soy. So Brazil can't fill that whole gap
Okay.
that comes out of the US.
All right.
So it's possible that they can do that. They can try it again, but we export so many natural resources that they just can't do it. The other part of the calculation is with Syria, with Iran, with Russia, with all that stuff happening in the Middle East, it it will endanger at least a portion of China's energy supply chain. Okay. So China has to keep its options open to source oil and gas from the US, particularly gas. US oil is a bit more expensive, of course, but they have to keep that supply open in case the Middle East continues to fall apart. So if the Turks take over Syria, if the IRGC in Iran takes more control of government, it could be somewhat problematic for exports to China. If Russia continues to have problems, it could be somewhat problematic for their supply chains of energy to China. I'm not in any way saying it would be 100% cut off, but together Iran and Russia supply 30 to 40% of the oil to China. So if there's a hiccup in their supply chains because of some political issues or regional issues or something, that could cause huge ripple effects in China. And they have to keep their potential supply for the US open. So I don't necessarily think the US-China discussion is a zero-sum discussion.
Okay.
China can say, yes,
I
we're going to cut off some key minerals, but then the US can cut some stuff off. And I don't think anybody really wants that on either side, regardless of how partisan they are.
I read a statement that G said that it was fine that Trump won because he would take the economy down faster.
Yeah, that's fine. I don't think Xi Jinping has really anything to brag about because China's economy is in a very
Well,
difficult
I'm just saying
position.
what he said.
Was he
Uh,
talking about the US economy or
yeah,
China's economy?
U.S.
Oh,
economy
yeah,
that
maybe.
he'll
It's
endanger.
possible.
Okay,
It's
and
it's it's possible.
all right, and you don't think don't it would take over 4 months to get new transformers here. We don't manufacture transformers for our grid.
Yeah,
Um,
I get that. Yeah.
we get a lot of them from China. Uh, you
And
know,
our pharmaceuticals and other
yeah,
things. And there are
yeah,
all of these cases
they're
that
not going to squeeze
Trump
us.
ran.
You're optimistic, Tony, that we're not going to be squeezed by China because they need us now.
Well, I think there are enough trade journalists out there who are very pro-China. Look at the Financial Times, look at Bloomberg, look at, a
Yeah,
lot of the financial press. They're extremely pro-China. So they will highlight every dramatic case possible to influence public opinion in the US.
okay,
You don't have the same thing in China, of course, right? You don't have China Daily, you don't have the Chinese newspapers who are looking at, say, dramatic cases of things being cut off from the US. But, these main US sources for news, the FT, Bloomberg, Wall Street Journal, extremely pro-China. So they're going to put the fear of trade wars into all of us over the next few months. And I think the new administration is going to be kind of swimming upstream, but I think their wording is going to continue to stay strong. Will they carry through on all of it? Of course not. But
yeah.
their wording and their messaging will stay very strong.
Well, it sure got a rise out of Trudeau to fly
Yeah,
to
exactly.
Florida unannounced and want to talk about these 25% tariffs. Let's get to, we're ending this year, 2024. We're in parabolic fashion in equities and in Bitcoin, basically in risk,
Yep.
right?
There's
You
no
see,
risk on the table.
yeah, that's what I mean. I mean, everyone's long risk. Do you see this
Yeah.
continuing until the market says, okay, we've heard the promises of what you're going to do. Now start delivering. And you know how patient us Americans are and Congress. People might start to get disillusioned by April if they're not starting to see things happen.
Oh yeah. I mean,
Besides
if they wait that
deportations.
long, if they wait
Yeah,
that long, Dale. So I think the big promise right now is around deregulation. And, if the administration comes in and cancels a lot of regulations, I think you'll continue to see uh, kind of a risk appetite. If they get tripped up on deregulation, then you're going to start to see jitters. So I think you'll probably start to see that starting in Feb, March, if it's going to appear. But again, we're always going to have, and one of your comments said X is the media now, and I believe that. You're going to have a lot of people in the traditional media channels who are very negative on every single step Trump does. We've seen this movie before,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Um, and someone also just said deregulation and AI efficiency. I run an AI company, so Complete Intelligence is an AI company. We for $25 a month, we forecast 1,800 items with a fresh new forecast every Monday. And so I run that with less than 10 people. When I led the economist research business, that was the country analysts and everything else, that was hundreds of people, right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
I have fewer than 10 people at Complete Intelligence, and we're doing global market forecasts, individual stocks, ETFs, everything, global economics.
Right.
So AI will add a massive amount of efficiency into government, into private sector, and other things. So that comment was absolutely right. And I think with the Department of Government Efficiency, and I don't mean this to sound naive at all, but I think with the Department of Government Efficiency, it's going to take longer than people are estimating. It's probably going to take over a year before they make dramatic impacts. But I
Yeah.
think we'll start to see some impacts on the federal government and automation and technology where things just haven't been. Because the MO,
Does your, I'm sorry, Tony, does your AI spit out longer term forecasts or they're just weekly?
no, we do monthly interval for 12 months.
Okay.
And that, again, that's refreshed every Monday morning. And so say mid-month, we take in the actual trading days to that point in the month, and then we'll reforecast the rest of the month. So that this month forecast is live, as are the next 12 months. Okay. So, we're looking at where markets will move over, I would say, the medium term. So there are a lot of people who do intraday. There's a lot of technical,
Okay.
analysis out there. And so
So,
we're using
so do
AI
you
to
think
do
we're going to
this.
have a continuation of uh, everything going higher together in 2025 as it is now?
I would say for the first quarter, that appears to be the case. I think
Okay.
beyond the first quarter, we have to be really careful. I'm not saying markets will crash or anything, but
Yeah.
as the policies of the new administration come into focus, investors will start to see risks and opportunities and treat them differently. So, we look
Okay.
at tech continuing to rally, we look at other things continuing to rally, and we look at Bitcoin continuing to rally. And I think at some point people have to sit back and say, is this really the right direction for this asset? Right. And so, that's really up to the individual investors to decide on what valuation they want. But what I hear more and more, and I've heard this, Dale, over the past, say, 2 to 4 weeks, more and more, is valuations seem extremely stretched. And so that becomes the sentiment, or has become the sentiment.
Yeah.
So I think as that becomes the sentiment, people become more, I would say, risk aware, not necessarily risk averse, but at least risk aware.
Okay, Tony. A really interesting discussion and your background and the things that you've lived and have gone through. Really interesting take on China today and what you see ahead. I appreciate you being here and giving your time to, you know, for us to have open minds and think about what you said.
Thank you,
So,
Dale. This is a great show. Appreciate it. Thank you.
I'm a fan. Okay, Tony.
Same. Thanks, Dale.
Yeah, great talking to you. I'll catch you into the brave new world next year. All
Yeah,
right,
I will.
buddy.
Thank you. All right,
All
bye.
right. All right.
Thanks,
Tony Nash,
everyone.
everyone. And go to Complete Intelligence, check his work out. Last time Tony was on, he was right about the euro. So check him out. That's a wrap for me. Isn't it Friday yet? Oh no, that's tomorrow. Okay. So NFP tomorrow. NFP tomorrow. Thank you, Laura. I enjoy talking to these people. I'm glad that some of you enjoy it as well. So remember, don't just count your tariffs, count your blessings. All right. I would say that to the president too. Don't just count your tariffs, count your blessings. And he has really been blessed, that's for sure. People are looking out, something's looking out for him. And that's a wrap, everybody. And see you tomorrow. We'll see how the dollar reacts, see how Blake's narrative unfolds. I'll see you tomorrow to react to the reaction. Adios.
Hey traders, this is Blake Morrow with ForexAnalytix. Thanks for stopping by our YouTube channel. Don't forget to like these videos, share them, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any of the content that we provide here for free. Thanks for stopping by. I'll see you in the next video.